The life and thoughts of a Confederate veteran moving to eastern Washington as a pioneer farmer in the late 1800s. Imagine a former Confederate soldier born in Georgia in the 1840s. He grew up working his family's small farm, learning how to plow fields, tend livestock, and manage crops like cotton and tobacco. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, he enlisted in the Confederate Army, fighting in battles across Virginia and Tennessee. He experienced hunger, exhaustion, and the horrors of war, losing comrades and narrowly escaping death himself. When the war ended in 1865, he returned home, only to find that everything had changed. His family farm had been damaged, money was scarce, and with the abolition of slavery, the Southern economy was in ruins. Reconstruction policies, high taxes, and new laws made life even harder. He felt the humiliation of defeat, the resentment toward Northern politicians, and the frustration of trying to rebuild in a region that no longer felt like home. With little left for him in Georgia, he heard whispers of opportunity in the West, particularly in Washington Territory, where land was cheap, the soil was rich, and a man could start fresh. By the early 1880s, he made the difficult decision to leave. He sold what little he had, said goodbye to his remaining family, and joined a group of former soldiers heading west. The journey was long, first by train through Tennessee and Missouri, then by covered wagon or steamboat up the Columbia River. Along the way, he met other Southerners looking for the same thing, a new start. Arriving in eastern Washington, he was struck by the vastness of the land. The rolling hills were unlike anything he had known back in Georgia. No towering oaks or swamplands, just endless golden fields stretching to the horizon. The soil was dark and rich, but the climate was dry. There were no large rivers for irrigation, and farming there would be different from the South. He staked his claim under the Homestead Act, securing 160 acres of land. The land was cheap, often free if he agreed to farm it for 5 years. The nearby town, maybe Walla Walla or Colfax or Spokane, was still small but growing, with rough wooden buildings, a few shops, and a saloon. Other settlers, many former Union soldiers, also lived nearby, but he found comfort in meeting fellow Southerners, men who had fought for the Confederacy and now worked to carve out a new life in this unfamiliar place. Life was harsh, and every day was a test of endurance. He had to build a shelter before winter set in, which meant cutting timber from the forests in the nearby Blue Mountains or trading with neighbors. He constructed a small sod house at first, then worked towards a wooden cabin when he had the time and materials. Farming was different from back home. The climate in eastern Washington was much drier than the humid South, which meant he had to learn dryland farming techniques. He discovered that wheat grew well here, unlike the cotton and tobacco of Georgia. At first he struggled, plowing the land with a single ox, sowing seeds by hand. But over time, he learned from neighbors and adapted. By the mid 1880s, he had a small but growing wheat farm, and the arrival of the Northern Pacific Railroad made it easier to sell his crops in town. At night, after a long day of work, he would sit on his porch, staring out at the fields, lost in thought. The West had given him a second chance, but he couldn't shake the past. He thought about his fallen friends, the war, and the South he left behind. Did he regret moving? Not exactly. He missed home, but he knew that life there would have been even harder. There were moments of pride when his first harvest was successful, when he bought his first horse, when he finally saved enough to build a bigger barn. Yet he often wondered about the future. Would his children, if he had any, remember the South? Would they grow up with his values? Or would they become fully Westerners, unburdened by the war? Though he tried to focus on farming, he still held quiet resentments. He had lost everything in the war, and deep down he resented the North for it. He avoided talking about politics in town, especially with Union veterans, but among fellow Southerners he could speak freely. Some nights in the saloon, he and other ex-Confederates would reminisce about the past, speaking in hushed tones about the battles fought, hardships endured, and what might have been if the war had ended differently. But still, the West changed him. The frontier was a place where a man was judged by his work, not his past. He built friendships with northern-born settlers and worked alongside immigrants from Germany and Scandinavia. He slowly let go of some of his bitterness. The land did not care whether he had fought for the Confederacy or the Union. It only demanded hard work. By the late 1890s, Will had become a respected farmer. His wheat farm was profitable, and he had a wife and children. He had survived blizzards, droughts, and economic downturns, proving to himself that he could rebuild from nothing. As he grew older, he told fewer stories about the war. The next generation, his children, were more concerned with wheat prices and the future of Washington statehood than memories of Gettysburg. He realized that they were no longer Southerners, but Westerners, free from the past that he had carried for so long. Looking back, he felt a strange mix of loss and satisfaction. The South he had fought for was gone, but he had built something new. He had proven that even in defeat, a man could rise again. And as he watched the golden fields sway in the wind, he knew that his life, though different from what he once imagined, had not been wasted.